Welcome to Conflict to Connection, the podcast that helps families navigate separation with compassion and understanding. I'm Mitch, a child consultant at Civilized Separations, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Bill and Bella. Together, we tackle tough conversations about divorce, co-parenting, and creating healthier family dynamics. Whether you're navigating a separation or just looking for better ways to connect, this podcast is here to guide you every step of the way. So today we're joined by Mable Edge, who's a leading voice in the world of family mediation with a deep commitment to child inclusive practice. Mabel is a co-founder and director of Children First Mediation, a service rooted in safeguarding children's well-being in the midst of family breakdown. Her focus on child inclusive mediation stands out in the field that can often overlook the voices of the most affected children. Her mission is to give families the tools and space to rebuild safe, respectful relationships during and after separation. So welcome.
Thank
you for
nice
coming on board. Yeah, you too. And first of all, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about what you do and also about what Children First Mediation is all about.
Okay, so we are a specialist family mediation service. For most of the time, we're working with children and young people and their families around sort of separation and divorce. So we do financial mediation as well, but actually about 85% of our work is in relation to sort of child arrangements and the time that they're going to spend with each parent and looking at improving the quality of that time for them. And as the biggest part of the work that we're doing is really ensuring that children and young people have a voice within that process. So that's really, really important to me. To make sure that we don't miss off that voice, and children and young people's voices are going to be heard, and what we're going to be able to do to improve that and make sure that we can kind of look to reduce some of the barriers that currently exist to parents potentially being resistant to children having their voice heard. But equally as important to that is mediators' resistance to children and young people having their voice heard as well.
So that's really interesting. So you don't always see people going for child inclusive mediation, even if they're offered it by mediators. But in your case, pretty much everyone goes for it. So why is that happening?
It's about how you kind of deal with resistance. I think it's the same sort of issue that we have with even enlisting people into mediation in the first place, really, and the fears that people have about sort of participating. We get a lot of resistance about the idea of, entering into mediation, having to meet with their ex-partner, looking at, what are the issues you want to try to resolve. And for us, pivotal to that from the start, when we do those initial meetings, people often come in saying, I don't want to mediate, and I'm saying, today really is about looking at, what the issues are you want to try to resolve, rather than looking at what the solutions are and, which route's the best route for you. So there's an opportunity for me to understand a bit about the situation so that we can then explore what the other opportunities might be. So sort of it's more of selling it more of as an opportunity for them, and then sort of looking at their sort of the dissatisfaction. What are the issues that they're dissatisfied with, so that we can kind of effectively provide them with a vision that some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, that something could be different and something could change. And, this could be the first step to doing that. But sort of weaving in the importance of the children's voice being heard, and just how powerful it is when you hear from children. And that moment, that real privilege that I feel when, I'm meeting with a young person and they're sharing their sort of thoughts and feelings with me. And then that privilege of actually sharing those views with the parents as well, and seeing that land, and watching them absorb that information, and actually the power of that. On Friday, I did some feedback for a young person to her parents, and after sort of hearing what she had to say, they were flawed. They were both flawed, and needed to have quite a substantial break, really. Before sort of moving on, and we just had to go and check in with each of them separately and just make sure that they could sort of manage to carry on emotionally.
So do you feel like that child inclusive mediation was then beneficial in that sense, or do you feel like the flooring was not beneficial?
Oh no, it was hugely beneficial, because they had to sort of stop, listen, and take stock. The reality was, they thought they were there in mediation about a dispute over, their daughter wanting to move in with the dad full time. and alongside that wanting to change secondary school. And, you know, what actually transpired as part of the Child Inclusive Mediation, and, you know, she came into the office. I started, you know, we had a sort of general chat and how she was getting on at school. And of course, she's not really keen on school at all, which, as it transpired, which was also quite interesting. I said, like, you know, do you want to use the flip chart? You know, and she was right up there, and she was writing away, and she was really engaged with the process herself. She had so much to say, and I was like, oh, well, just, you know, let's just get right mum up then. Okay, so you've not got a good relationship with mum. Let's talk about that then. You know, what needs to change? What needs to be different for you to have a better relationship with your mum? Okay, so what's your relationship? What's the difference then? What's your relationship with your dad like? And we had this really dynamic conversation. But the crux of it really was for her was that actually, you know, when I said to her, you know, what's the most important thing for you to happen out of this process? And she said, for my mum and dad to stop arguing, to stop the conflict.
You see that all the time and time again. They say
And
that.
I said to her, okay, if the conflict stopped, what would be different? She said, well, all of this is because of the conflict. If there wasn't any conflict, then I wouldn't be sitting here asking to move in with my dad, and I wouldn't be sitting here asking to change school. But actually, I'm saying all the rest just falls in, she says. I'm just part of the drama. And she says, I don't mind a bit of drama, but actually I'm done with it. I'm done with listening to them arguing. I'm done with listening to the fighting. I'm done with listening to dad's side and mum's side and getting all confused about which one to believe. And they had to listen to that. And they had to take stock. And when they came back in that moment and they were like, we've done this to her. We've actually done this to her. We have to do something different. We've got to stop this.
She's told them exactly what they need to do differently as well. It's the amazing thing about kids is that they can put such a light on the important part.
Absolutely.
And the conflict. She literally said, it's the conflict. If there was no conflict, there would be no problem. So really what they need to do at that point is listen.
Absolutely, 100%. And if they can take that on board, and part of the preparation work is, for me, is really, really critical. Even though the mediator, who wasn't a child inclusive mediator, had seen the parents and had had that initial session, I still conducted my own initial conversations with them just to make sure that they could make use of child inclusive mediation, so that if the child was to say something that may be a bit controversial or maybe didn't align with their particular views, would they be able to sort of take that on board, and how might they react and how might they respond? Because in the past, you know, and I've done a lot of child inclusive mediation over the years, and you know, we've had examples of where parents haven't been able to then make use of it, you know, where they've made a commitment to listening to the voice of their sort of son or daughter, usually in specific issue cases. So, for example, choices of secondary school, and, you know, where you've got this sort of child saying, well, you know, I want to go to this school, and perhaps telling one parent one thing, one parent something else, not always. But the one case that sort of stands out for me is a young man whose parents had argued about which primary school he'd gone to. And here they were now arguing about which secondary school he should go to. And, you know, the debate goes on, you know, all these years later through all the way through his primary school. And, you know, mum was, they were in court, and the court had directed them back, and they were saying, you know, yes, of course, you know, if he says, you know, if George says he wants to go to this school in Torbay, then, you know, I'll support that fully 100%. But, you know, I think that this is a better school. And, you know, if he wants to go to the school in Paynton, then, you know, I'll support that, and vice versa with dad. But actually what happened was the parents couldn't agree where he would be met. And I said, actually, because now they're arguing about that, right? So when we looked at the neutrality of venues, they weren't comfortable using school. And I said, actually, if we're going to listen to George, let's just ask George where he would be most comfortable to have his voice heard. So George said, I gave him a range of options. And George said, I would actually like to have it at home, at my mum's house, in my bedroom. Is that okay? And it was online. So I was on Zoom. He showed me around his room and every single poster that he had. And he had, you know, he was very, very engaged in the process. And we talked about schools, and, you know, he was so able to tell me about the differences of the two schools. He was talking about the outdoor space. He was talking about the science labs, the arts and crafts department. He's very technology minded, and he'd been and he liked the experiments that they'd done when he'd been on the open day, and he'd been to open days at both schools. And so he was sort of able to say, the pros and cons. We looked at the pros and cons of each of the schools, and sort of, why his preference was the school that he was kind of preferencing. And then having then gone back and shared that information with mum and dad, and mum said, I'm not supporting George's views. I don't agree. I still think that this is the best school for him here. So I'm not going to listen to that, and we'll go back to court and we'll ask the court to decide. Well, of course, the court had diverted them to Child Inclusive Mediation to hear George's voice, because they thought it was critical to the outcome of the situation.
I think in those circumstances, how do you get them to a point? Because the structure of UK accredited mediation, it focuses very heavily on procedure and neutrality. But do you believe that we're kind of losing a bit of that human relational side of connecting with someone, being able to fully work with them and change their mindset if you can't be semi-empathetic with them?
So we're very flexible in our service as to how we work around it. And we've got several of our mediators aren't SIM trained, which actually suits us, because it means that I can go in and do the SIM, for example, and I don't need to be neutral. I just need to represent the views of the child and the voice of the child. And then that enables then the mediator to remain and to be able to summarize and paraphrase what I've said and pull out those key points and be able to keep hitting them back with them during the mediation once I've gone. Because what happens, particularly if a child's views are particularly aligned with, say, mum or dad, then if it's with dad, for example, then mum can feel that the mediator then is on dad's side, because the child's views were closely aligned to dad's particular perspective, and if we have to keep reminding them what the child has said, and asking them how they're going to incorporate what George wants, or whatever the child's called, how you're going to incorporate that child's voice within your planning and within any plan. How does this fit with what George has said he wants, is much easier to do when you haven't been involved in that meeting with the child. So I don't think the process is right.
I'm just thinking that in a way there are constrictions are placed upon you that stop you from doing the work that you'd like to do, and you've got to find sort of ways around that. So you can come in as a child consultant and say stuff that the mediator can't say, but then the mediator can pick up from where you got to. Yeah. So it's kind of like we've had to find ways to do what we intuitively know we need to do, without actually sort of flagrantly going against the sort of guidelines, but definitely they're not helping us. The guidelines aren't helping us. We've got to find ways around them to stop them stopping us from doing what we need to do.
Because as a mediator, I can't get away with saying half the things that I get away with saying as a child consultant.
Yeah.
So what is that? Why is that? Explain that a little bit more to me if I don't really know the ins and outs of what is a child consultant or what is a mediator. What's the difference?
Well, when I'm acting as a child consultant and I haven't been mediating, and I won't continue to mediate with the family, it allows, I satellite in really. I come in, I see the child, I have brief conversations with the parents, I see the child or the children, I sort of speak to them about their sort of thoughts and feelings and their views, and the kind of key information they want to feed back, what needs to be different, what might need to change in order for things to be better for them. I then satellite into a mediation session, hit the parents with the information, let it sink, and then I'm able to say, it's really important that you take on board, what George has said, or I'll tell them how distressed the child or how upset the child was at this particular moment. I was explaining about their level of hesitation that their child had had in that moment. And Dad was saying, oh no, she's clear she wants to change schools. And I said, and I appreciate that might be what she told you previously, but I want to be clear with you that that's not what she was saying to me. And that the hesitation came in, and what her hesitation was, and it was very clear, is if this conflict between you stopped, she doesn't want to move in with you full time, Dad. She's quite happy doing 50-50. And she doesn't think she'd want to move schools because as she reflects, she says to me, could be that I just don't like secondary school.
And so you wouldn't be able to do that as a mediator?
No.
That's what I'm kind of interested in. So what happened with us was that we weren't able to kind of become accredited because we didn't have the right history. So we didn't have those constraints imposed upon us. We were kind of free to just craft something that we felt had all the good stuff, but not all the stuff that wasn't helpful. So the situation you're in is that you have to be incredibly powerful because you've got to come into something where someone else has been working with them before, and that person might be completely at odds with where you want to go. You've got to come in, you have a brief moment, have an enormous impact, and then you hope that the effect of your impact will last where the parents continue to think the way you want to, but also the mediator does.
Absolutely.
So it seems to me that you're trying to kind of have a big effect in an environment that's really not working with you. And let's suppose the mediator doesn't really feel the same way you do about children.
Well,
You're handing them back to that person.
The one thing that sort of struck me as you were talking there, Bill, was that I've been sort of invited. Is that the right word? So my reputation is, it gets around. So I've been booked in on Friday to see some children for a company called ABC Mediation, which sort of surprised me who they are. I've never heard of them. It just sort of appeared in my diary, but apparently they've been in contact with the office and they've heard that I'm the person to see these children. But I was thinking about, a company that was in the Midlands who had come and approached us about doing child inclusive mediation and thinking, we thought we had it all sussed. We'd done the prep calls, I've seen the children, I do the feedback, but then what I wasn't aware of because of how the other mediator, because they're not sim trained and their value base is different to mine, perhaps.
They might all be about sort of outcomes.
Well, what happened was that I delivered the feedback, which was really, really powerful and really strong and hard hitting, but that's what the child had wanted to say. And it was, again, in the scenario where the child is basically sick and tired of the fighting. It needs to stop. So it's sort of nosiness. I don't know. I really want to know what the outcome is post mediation. But actually, when I contacted the mediator, she said, "Oh, well, look, I ended the session after you left, and the parents have chosen not to come back to mediation to discuss what they're going to do next."
So you missed out, really.
And well, they missed out.
They missed out because they weren't able to have what you would have been able to do.
Because our process would be, and we've done so many of them. We know that. We need to get the parents, the momentum needs to be there. So we see the child and then we see the parents within a couple of days. We want to give that mindset.
Momentum.
Yeah. And we also don't want the child to be sitting around wondering when their views are going to be heard. And we want them to have some feedback from what the parents have said. But also that we then run straight into, we have a short break. And if they need a little bit longer break, then we continue. And then we start moving into, let's look at options. What needs to be different? What needs to change?
Because you want to use that powerful notion that you've given them and that you've implanted into their brain. You need to use that. You can't just let it sit there and then fizzle out.
And they go away and then they don't come back. They don't benefit from having heard the child's voice. Nothing's likely to change. They've gone back to their places. They remember bits that they heard that were sore, that don't sit so comfortably about them. But they don't hear the stuff that needs to change.
So if there's obviously a lot of movement being made with the child inclusive mediation, and that's kind of changing people's mindsets. But when you're actually thinking about mediation and the landscape of mediation, what needs to change in order for everybody's being able to work their magic?
I think the problem, as I see it, is that the people who develop the systems and processes currently are so far removed from the reality. I mean, that's my take on it. So I'm not even eligible to deliver child inclusive mediation training, right? I can't tick all the right boxes because the people that have created these systems and processes that are so far removed from the real world have put these barriers in place to people like me being able to even deliver the training, because they're delivering the training.
It's kind of like, it's not the opposite of merit-based in a way, where you'd be an excellent person to tell other people how to do the work, but because you haven't, I don't know, come from a particular stream, or you're not in the right company or whatever, you're not allowed you're not allowed to share your knowledge.
Yeah, you're not allowed to share your knowledge. It's made very difficult to do that. So you've got you've got your handful of the same people who set up the systems and processes. They cobbled together the working group when Child Inclusive Mediation was developed. I think I remember, because Lisa Parkinson, who's sort of well known in this country for her sort of contributions to family mediation and the sort of books that she's written on it, but she sort of a couple of days beforehand said, "Oh, well, we're gonna have this meeting in London about child inclusive mediation, can you be there in 2 days?" It's like, that's a little bit impractical, if that's how you're cobbling together. It's such a valuable thing that we're going to do. We thought we'd give you 2 days notice, and your contributions are really valued. It was before COVID. We said, could we do it online? It would definitely not. You couldn't contribute to anything online, and therefore your contributions weren't valid. And I think like the system, the process as it stands at the moment, was developed by a group of people, whoever could make it within 2 days to this meeting. It was made then, and so therefore it's stuck. But there's been there's no one gathering any information, no research on it. No one's really kind of like looking at who's doing it, collecting information on the numbers that we're doing, and then actually, getting together and saying, okay, like, at Children First Mediation, they've done like 300 child inclusive mediations in the last 18 months. We ought to try to use that somehow. It's like such rich information. And, we've had like over 50 odd feedback forms, and I said the 6 today. And over 50 feedback forms from children and young people, like rich information about, we might not be asking them the right questions. We're trying to, we're thinking on our feet about how can we do that. But, they've taken the time to like give us some feedback so that we can try to make it a better process for them and for other young people when we're working with them in the future, and sort of try and learn some lessons from them. And no one's interested in that. Weird.
When you're talking about that kind of like outdated system and the fact that it needs to change, and the fact that you're making that change and they're not really taking any of it on or asking you about how are these things that you've implemented making an impact, what is that kind of, if you could tell me one outdated idea or one thing in the mediation world that really boils your blood, that really you find frustrating, or the thing that stopped putting that barrier up, what would that be?
I think it's the sort of outdated system, basically, where mediation's it becomes so rigid. There's no flexibility within it. In fact, we've shot ourselves in the foot really and I don't agree with compulsory mediation, but there are ways in which it could have been managed differently. And since we, as a kind of profession, said, "Oh no, we don't want to turn it into a you've got to attend before you go to court scenario," we opened up the door to NCDR, and you can call yourself whatever you like.
Can you just clarify what that is?
So non-court dispute resolution. When the change came in last year, everyone changed their profile on LinkedIn and became a non-court dispute resolution practitioner.
Do you mean that it's kind of allowed people in who aren't necessarily particularly good at their job, or
people that just solicitors,
sort of
lawyers? They maybe, most of them haven't even been on a training course, but if they've maybe been on like a 5 or 6 days of training, and therefore they're just become a non-court dispute, they're not following any particular process, there's no standards.
So you think that kind of movement from the legal world to the mediation world is a difficult one to venture into, and also the mindset's completely different and the background's completely different. So, and as you're saying, there's no standard there.
It undermines everything that we've been doing, to get towards, my reaccreditation is due on the 13th, which I think was yesterday. And I just sat the weekend and I thought, flip, I've got this silly nonsense. It's 29 pages of stuff over the last 3 years. And I'm having to sit there and write all this minutiae about the days and times and the numbers of hours. I thought, what is
and who's going to read it?
What is it? Someone will read it, trust me. Someone will read it. But why though?
And what does it actually show in terms of your skill or your
It doesn't
abilities?
show anything. It just shows I've been on a lot of courses and that I've done a lot of things. But actually, is that I'm sitting there thinking, why do I need to bother? I said to my partner, maybe I won't bother filling it in and sending it in. Maybe I don't need to be an accredited mediator
Maybe
anymore.
you could just, craft your own.
I don't know, because I'm being constrained by this thing that says that this FMC
Where is
world.
that culture of needing to so tightly control people's practice come from? What's it in response to?
I think I could see that there was some value in having some standards, like a baseline that people need to work from, a bit of a framework. But mediation's not linear, right? It's such a strange thing. And I support a lot of trainees in family mediation, and they'll come off the course and they say, but on the course you go from just defining the arena, exploring the issues, option exploration, and then we're moving on to sort of closure. And it's like, that's just not how it is though, is it? These are like real people and their real lives. We move up and down this thing. It's not like fixed, and they're trying
every single person you see is going to be different.
And it's like, it doesn't work like that. No, but they said on the course it did. Yeah, no, they did say that on the course, but it's not real. And it's like, even with the training, like, fundamentally it's all wrong, isn't it? Right. So there's a bunch of people out there charging people a lot of money, £3,000 to go on a training course. It's bums on seats at the end of the day, right? So if you want to get someone trained in the foundation course, we know who to send them to. If you just want to get someone to get the basics, and you want to get the tick in the box, good example, you're meant to have come from some kind of transferable skills background, counseling, therapy, apparently legal, social work, what have you. I was astounded by the sweet shop owner who had sold up the sweet shop and decided she wanted to be a family mediator. And there she is on her 8 days, and, lo and behold, she'll be a family mediator at the end of it. All not be accredited, but, she will be working towards accreditation. Or the man that contacted me a couple of weeks ago, he was in television broadcasting in London, and he's decided he wants to start up a new career as a family mediator, and he's got his date for his course, and he's, off he goes.
I mean, it's a big question for me to ask. I'm just going to ask anyway, but what do you think should be done differently then? Like, obviously, that's me asking, can you fix everything for us? But really, in terms of if you're trying to get people to be properly trained and have the right experience and all of this sort of stuff, what should they do?
Well, you do need a set of standards, don't you? We do need standards, a framework that we work within. But I think that there needs to be some changes in the hierarchy. I mean, it doesn't work right at all at the moment. We've got all these issues of conflict of interest issues, and we've got issues in terms of our supervision model, because you only have to have supervision 4 hours a year, which is fantastic when most of my practitioners are working like 30 odd hours a week with families. 4 hours a year is not going to cut it. But actually, where for me, I think that the FMC needs to step up. It needs to change. It needs to become. I know they are making changes as a body, but it needs to be more robust. It doesn't really do anything to support us. They're not supporting, not raising awareness or the profile of mediation, so that culturally people are aware of it. It's not out there. The Ministry of Justice aren't doing anything about it. All these. So what are we paying our money for?
And I'm guessing you're saying as well that the structure of mediation in itself and the way that it's done, even as you were saying, you can send people off to certain mediation practitioners, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the right mediation.
No.
So in terms of that means that the structure needs to change.
Absolutely.
You kind of want that freedom, but you don't want charlatans putting up the thing outside the door and saying, I'm open for business.
Here. Yeah. And I think, we're lucky in building those relationships. So knowing who you can trust to send it to,
But that's kind of ad hoc and lucky. There's no real kind of system.
No, there's no system at all. Even with the introduction of non-court dispute resolution and opening that as a door, as a mediation service, we've gone out and we've, found had to go and find out about arbitration and go and find an arbitrator to come and do a talk for us, and go and find a non-court dispute resolution practitioner and come and tell us about what that means, and so that we can actually, and how do you get an arbitrator anyway, like what are they, how embarrassing, about 60% of our clients are eligible for legal aid. So, the state are funding mediation for at least one of the parties and then providing a voucher for the other. And, people haven't got any money, right? So I'm sitting there and I have to tell them about arbitration, right? These people don't have any, they haven't have enough money to feed the children. And I have to tell them about arbitration.
You mean you're sort of obligated to mention it because it's part of your
part of our remit now. We have to tell them about arbitration, even though we know they can't afford.
Do you think that's the opposite way around when they go to like legal aid? Do you think that they're obligated to tell them that you could go to a mediator and get this resolved?
They are obligated to, but we know that they don't. I mean, we know that there are some great legal practitioners out there, no doubt. Honestly, we do have some good legal practitioners out there who will signpost people to mediation. But there are others who, we know that how their fee structure works. The reality is that they're looking from the moment of onboarding a client into a legal firm that their client-based record management systems are based on inputting and how much money do you think you can make from these people.
So if you were sending people off to some other process that might be more therapeutic and possibly even more beneficial, you'd be actually doing yourself no favors, because you're, as a representation of this legal firm, you'd be actually bringing in less money.
Yeah, and that's an issue. So and Peter, one of my mediators yesterday, said it, and he was a solicitor. He said, it's not necessarily in the solicitor's interest to send them to us as a service. They might choose to send them to a mediator who's not so good. Why do you think that is?
Send to a bad mediation, I'll come back to the law.
Because they will have to go back. But actually, we know that if you come to us, you're far less likely to need to go back and use, they might get to a consent order on finances, or, we don't really advocate consent orders in children's issues. I mean, obviously that's for them to take some independent legal advice about, but for the basis of no order principle, if there's no need for an order, then they shouldn't be really having one. So for the most part, people don't leave family mediation and children's issues going for a consent order. So there's generally nothing to take legal advice about. So the reality is that, there's no further role for a solicitor. And when I met a lady Tuesday, she said to me, the solicitor told her to tell me that mediation wasn't suitable. And that's, obviously that's my decision to make. And I find that it is suitable for mediation, and the fees that she's been quoted is £40,000 for court. So if I said, I can sign the form for you if that's really what you want, but I'm signing you up to spending £40,000.
So why do you think there's so many professionals and actually parents and couples that are so timid about coming to mediation and the processes of mediation, and on top of that, especially child inclusive mediation?
I think people don't know about it yet. I think there's still culturally, what do we do if we got a problem? We go to somebody else to tell us what to do. I think that, that's British culture. Oh, there's a problem. Who can we blame? Oh, let's find someone we can blame. And if we're not blaming someone, it's whether it's your housing issues, whether it's a neighbourhood dispute, whether it's your landlord, we're just looking for someone to blame. So looking at a model that encourages ownership and responsibility is a big change, isn't it? And on my training course back in 2009, 2010. Crossover. I was the only person there when everyone in the room was a lawyer.
Because you see time and time again, I mean, you look up to become a mediator and it says how to transfer from a solicitor to mediator, how to transfer into law to mediator. There's nothing about, therapy professionals or people who care about relational aspects or, as you said, like restorative, actually understanding yourself and one's position and really thinking about that, and then going into mediation.
The sea change was 2011. I think the reforms were with the legal aid reforms. Every person in the room was going, "I'm here for the money. I'm here for the money. I'm here for the money." And to the lady sat to my left who says, "I'm here to get a piece of the pie." piece of the pie, and sort of as it transpired, because I was new into this, I was working in the local authority, right? So someone gave me money to run the services I was running. Yeah. So it was a bit different. So I was like, oh, wow, what is this thing that they're talking about? And actually, this is around the legal aid reforms, where the government took away the funding from, families fighting one another, which they've been doing for years through the legal system, and said, actually, we're not going to pay for that anymore. We're going to stop giving solicitors money to allow families to fight with one another. We're going to give the money to mediation. So that meant for the solicitors quite a significant drop in their income and what they were doing, why they transferred their skills, went on the training course, was because, they were losing
They
money.
needed the money.
They needed the money.
Do you think there's a bit of an influence of the nature of people in dispute and the organisations that are supposed to be working with them? I know that you get you get culturally influenced by the people you work with. So, in some environments, like I can remember working for or in conjunction with the Department of Justice, and it was all about working with, offenders. And the people that worked there they had a very similar attitude to the offenders in many ways. They were very kind of aggressive and single-minded and rigid in terms of their thinking. And a lot of the people that were in the system, often people that were found guilty of domestic violence offences, had a very similar way of thinking. Do you think in some ways that the institutions that are supposed to be helping people resolve disputes have become too affected because they've been around too many disputes? They become, I mean, in many ways, what you're saying is what's on offer or what's being sort of, encouraged by government or courts or whatever is flawed. You're not really able to work your magic. Is it something to do with the people who make those decisions for you? Have they been affected by being around too much dispute?
Well, I think when you actually look at it, who even are they? So how much have the government really invested in mediation? They've chucked some money at it, but they're chucking money at any single mediator who happens to be accredited. There's no actual. So you've got an FMC and you have to be on the register, right? But you have to meet the conditions to be on the register. And then every 3 years, you've got to reaccredit, as I'm at the point at the moment. Reaccredit again, to show you've ticked all the right boxes to stay on the register. But other than that, really, you're everyone to themselves, right? So you go on a course, and someone takes $3,000 from you, and then you're like, go set yourself up with a website. Get on with it, guys. Off you go and see if you can maybe even watch a mediation before you do one. What about that? That'd be great. And they're left to their own devices. But we say, but you must get yourself a supervisor. You must pay a supervisor. And 4 hours a year, as long as you cover 4 hours a year, you'll be good. You'll be safe to practice, and the quality of your work, no one will see it, but you'll be good, won't you?
And within those mediation courses, is there anything about child inclusive mediation?
No, there's a requirement now for all mediators once they're accredited, or just before they're accredited, they have to attend an awareness session, so which is now increased from 1 day to 2 days.
And does the awareness make them good at working with child consultants?
I think no, because a good example of that is where, you've got this situation where when we're doing these sims for other companies, is that they haven't got a clue how to prepare a family for child. So
you're really up against it because the people that you're working with have got no idea.
None at all.
So you not only got to kind of address the fact that they might have been encouraged to think in a way that's not helpful, you've got to deal with that. You've got to then sort of nudge them to become more child focused. You all got to do all this within a fairly small period of time.
You're my remit in that scenario. Someone's going to pay me for an hour of my time to see a child, and then going to pay me for half an hour of my time to feed it back, right? They're in this my job.
Got to work magic within a very short period of time.
Okay, but I need to know what's going to happen after that. I'm not prepared to do that bit there unless I know that there's going to be some quality that comes out of the other end, because I'm not going to do any harm. Everything
you've done could be undone, or even worse.
Even worse.
Even worse.
The system as it stands at the moment is that if you get a complaint, or a mediator gets a complaint, they're supposed to speak to their supervisor about it. If they don't speak to their supervisor about it, nobody knows, and therefore it's gone away. unless the person escalates it to a certain level. But your supervisor will only deal with a complaint if you tell them about it and you pay them, right? So the relationship is quite odd, so you have to pay them. How is that a safe system?
So the system in its structure and the way that mediators are trained, already the training is not quite
Who we
right.
let into the training?
You let into the training, and the mindset of those people as well and why they're there is a problem. And then also facilitating after the training how to keep up with people to make sure that actually what they're doing is right and it's being safe. And it's safe and that they're developing as mediators as well. All of that isn't functioning either. So really people are not getting the service that they ask for when they come to a mediator.
No. And what I think, and I said it when I went on to, I'm on the FMSB, so the Family Mediation Standards Board, for professional practice consultancy. So, I'm really, I'm obviously not fit to be on the Child Inclusive one. I don't obviously know enough about it.
Clearly.
So
all those hours.
Yeah, it's definitely, I haven't quite sort of got my hours in for that one. So I'm on the professional practice consultant one, which is about really shaping the future of the supervision, making sure that, things are changing how we practice. When I joined that group, must be 2.5 years ago now, I said, something's got to change. And I'll tell them right away what needs to change is that somebody needs to employ, it doesn't have to be an employment contract, but to contract the supervisors. So mediators need to buy their supervisor from an organization, right? There cannot be this relationship where I pay you to supervise me. It doesn't work. You need to say, okay, I've got my registration with the FMSB, and as part of my registration, I pay for my minimum numbers of hours of supervision, and then I buy my supervision from the FMSB or whatever that organization is. Because then, if I'm not happy with the quality of my supervision, I've got someone that I can talk to about it. And there's no accountability. I guess that's what I'm saying is what's missing is the accountability. Like, who are we accountable to? Because for me, I'm all about the quality of the provision that we're providing to families. It's got to be of a high quality. If it isn't, then we need to do something different. And, for me, it's not about making money. Of course, we need to make money, but that's not my primary objective. My primary objective is about improving outcomes for children and young people. The outcomes for children and young people have to be at the fore of what we're doing. But interestingly, no one's really measuring that or monitoring that. Nobody knows how many mediations we do.
A lot of people aren't taking on child inclusive mediation to be able to resolve that either. Because that is a way in resolving the issues with children is
listening to them and giving them that space. I think sometimes people get a bit caught up with thinking that there needs to be a specific issue to ask them about, but that's not what it's about. Actually, it's about giving them that opportunity and that space to think about how things are for them. And actually, when you talk to children about that and they're able to then say that things that they're not very happy about something, or that there is something they'd like to change, or it would be better for them if this happened or that didn't happen, then we shouldn't be so agenda-led with it and thinking like, okay, well, which school do you want to go to? It's not about which parent do you want to live with. We're not putting them in the middle of it. That's not what it's about. But it's about what needs to happen for you to feel safe. Tell me about what you enjoy about being at mum's house, what you enjoy about being at dad's house. And, was there anything that mum could do differently? Is there anything dad could do differently? What does it look like? Let's draw a picture of dad. What's the best dad look like? We see a lot of children who are refusing to see one or other parent. That's very common, as we know, in high conflict cases. Children just vote with their feet. And I talk a lot about a drawbridge, and I'll sort of talk to parents about stability and security. And, for a drawbridge to be able to stand up, we need stability, we need security. And actually, it doesn't matter which side of the bridge is up. Those children have to make that physical, but more importantly, that emotional journey between mum's side and dad's side of that bridge, right? That's the reality. And whether it's mum is up, the child still has to make the leap. Whether it's dad, both, the void is big. And so the child eventually stops crossing. And they say, no, I can't cope with it anymore.
Which really comes down, again, not so much to the individual characters, but more the quality of the relationship between them. And if they were able to kind of be more united,
100%.
They could give each other a bit of a nudge, a bit of a hint. Like if you want to make sure that the child has a good time with you, just think about this or do this, just as one parent to another, sort of a bit of a
that you could listen and respect.
Yeah. So,
which is what's missing often, is the communication and the cooperation. The level at which they're at is that they're generally unable to communicate with one another, and there's no desire to. We meet a lot of parents who don't believe there's any need to talk to their ex-partners, you know. So I say you've got another 14 years of this to do, right? So how are you going to do it, right?
Yeah.
So
what if this happens or that happens?
Yeah.
You're surely going to have to communicate with each other. Like,
what do you need to speak
Yeah,
about? And they're like, nothing. And it's like, okay, well, let's have a little reality check there. You know, that there are a number of things that you're going to need to talk about. So if she's with mum, what would you want to know? You know, oh, I want to know about everything, you know. Okay, what does everything look like? You know, health, education. So, because often we see, when I've broken it down, it doesn't get covered in the training in UK, but it's about expectations, right? So I see a lot of dads who say, and she never tells me this, and she never tells me that, and I didn't know she had. And then you're on the flip side, mum's saying, and he never asked, and he never sent, and he never turns up, you know. So what I'm hearing is actually that you know, when you were together, that, you know, you get along, you muddle along, you know, you don't need to make an event out of saying that little Johnny's had to go to the doctors, right? Or the dentist, or that there's a parent, and you just know because you talk about it over dinner or whatever. You sat in front of the telly, oh, I took him to the doctors early. All right, what happened there? Oh, we bumped his head. Okay, it's all done. But actually now there's an event that might need to be made of it. So what would you want to know? What would you want to know?
It's a different structure. It's a different relationship. They've got to put different things at play in here. They've got
100%.
to make new mechanisms in order to make it work.
And I think that's where we come in. I think, you know, obviously, you know, and it's not even just around separation, because a lot of the time we see this, they've separated, they've not navigated it very well, they've had a lot of bumps in the roads, communication's deteriorated to such a level. And actually, when you actually break it down, it is fairly straightforward, is that there's, you know, she's expecting this, he's expecting that. So let's look at what you're expecting. Set out your stall as dad. What is, you know, let's be clear. Let's be clear what you want to know. Let's be clear about what your expectations, what are you bringing to the table as a father for Johnny? What are you going to bring to the table? What can mum expect from you? And what are you expecting from mum? Mum, what are you expecting from him as a dad? What are you intending to bring to the table? And then we can then look at the areas where there's perhaps some tension, and actually just hone in and focus on those, because actually that's generally where the tensions are. It's actually, okay, well, you're expecting this and you're expecting that. Okay, so let's talk about that. And I think since COVID, right, I have to say that shared care since COVID has just been such a big wave. Before COVID, you might as well have got your rubber stamp out and seen what came out of court. It was like every other weekend, Wednesdays for tea, sometimes Wednesdays overnight. What a bonus. But actually what we've seen is a completely different, you know, we had a lot of different things happening over COVID, but since COVID, so much more of the arrangements are shared care, towards a 50-50, if not 50-50, you know, every other week about Monday to Wednesday, Wednesday to Friday, and alternate weekend schedules. It's a significant shift in thinking. So that has been a massive cultural change.
So in a way, the only way change is happening in this environment is if you have a plague.
Yeah.
A pandemic. A lot obviously needs to change. That is the
Clearly.
answer. Yes.
Thank you, Mabel, for
I
highlighting
think we're
it.
going to have to stop there.
So-
Although we could probably talk
We
for
could
hours.
probably did.
Thank you
But
very much.
thank you for coming in. That was really
Oh,
interesting.
you're welcome. No, it's
Yeah.
nice to meet you. Nice to
Yeah.
meet you, Bill.
Good to meet you.
You
Put a name
too.
to a face.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks for joining us on Conflict to Connection. We hope today's episode gave you some fresh insights to help you navigate your journey. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe or follow the podcast and leave a review. For more resources and support, follow us at Civilized Separations on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. You can also visit our website at civilizedseparations.co.uk. See you next time, where we'll be exploring ways to build stronger connections for a brighter future.